Hello everyone. Today we will be viewing our backend project, and in this project we have to do the following tasks which have been mentioned here. We have implemented this project using Node.js as a runtime environment, and we will be using MongoDB for storing all the data that will be generated during this project. To start with the project, first we will need to install some dependencies. I have already installed the dependencies. The dependencies are bcrypt, body parser, .env, express, JSON web token, mongoose, and nodemon. So the functionalities of these dependencies are: bcrypt is used to hash passwords, body parser is used to pass the request body, .env is used to get the information from the .env file, express is a framework which is built on top of Node.js that provides a set of features for our application, like creating APIs, routing, writing middlewares, etc. JSON web token will be used for authentication. Mongoose is used to connect our backend with the database. And finally, we have nodemon, which is used for live reloading of our server. So the first file that we will create in this project is our index.js file, and we will import our express and body parser packages in this file. Next, we will set up our app using express, and then we will declare our port. So for this project, we will use the port 8000, and then we will write this listen function, which will tell us if our server has started successfully or not. So if our server starts successfully, then it will log this statement, which is server started successfully at port 8000. Now the next thing for us to do is to create a database to store the data for our project. And for this, we will use MongoDB Atlas as our database. MongoDB Atlas is a cloud platform using which we can store our data into the cloud. So we will not need any memory on our own system to store our data. It will be all stored on the MongoDB cloud. So to create our database, we need to go on the MongoDB Atlas site. We need to sign in, and then we have to create a cluster. So I have already created my cluster here. To establish the connection between our backend and our database, MongoDB gives us a URI, and we have to write a connection function using that URI to establish a connection between the two. So for establishing the connection, we will create a folder called database, and inside that folder we will have this file db.js, and inside this file we will import mongoose and .env. So we will first configure the .env file and extract the information, which is our username and the password from it. Next, we have the connection function, and note that it is an asynchronous function as we are fetching the data from an external platform. So we will be making asynchronous calls so the execution of our program doesn't break. Inside the connection function, we have used the try catch block for exception handling, and inside the try block we have our URI, and then we have our connect statement which will take that URL, and next we have our connect statement which will take that URL to establish the connection. If the connection is established successfully, then the statement database connected successfully will be logged. As you can see down here, I have already established the connection between my database and MongoDB, and it is returning me a statement database connected successfully in the console. If for any reason we are not able to connect with our database, then the statement error while connecting the database and along with the error message will be logged in our console. We will then export this connection function, and we will import it in our index.js file. We will call this function here to establish the connection. And now after this function, this app.listen statement will execute. Now for our project, we require the data of user and the slots that the dean will create, and for that we are required to build documents for user as well as the slots. So we will create a models folder, and in that folder first we will create this file called user.js. In the user.js file, we will import mongoose, and after that we will define our schema or the structure of our document. For every field in this user document, we have also added some validations for each of our field. For example, the validation added for the user ID is that its type should be string, and its required value is set to be true, and also it should be unique, as we have set the unique value to be true. And similarly, we have done the validations for other fields as well. We will create the user model, and for this we will use this statement mongoose.model. It takes the name of the model as well as the user schema as parameters, and finally we will export this model. To implement our first task, we will need to create some routes, and we will create a route for register so that the user is able to register, and we will also create a login route so that the user is able to log in, and if the user is able to log in successfully and if the login credentials of the user are matched, then we will provide him with a token, and for that we will use the JSON Web Token authentication. So we will create a routes folder, and inside that we will create a route.js file. So in this file we will import express first, and then we will set our route using the express.router. So our first route is the registration route, and using this we will add the user. Now this route uses the post method, and this is our route, the add user, and this is our controller that we are passing in it. Basically this add user function will be executed when a request is made. Next we will create another folder called controllers, and in that, for the user, we will create a file called user controller. Inside this file we will import our user from the models, and we will also import bcrypt for hashing our password. We will import JWT for authentication. Next we will create this add user function, which is an asynchronous function. It will take request and response as parameters, and inside these functions we will use the try catch block for exception handling. So inside this function, first we will check if our user exists or not, and if our user exists, then we will respond with the message that user already exists. Then if the user doesn't exist already, then first we will hash his password. So whatever password is coming from the body, we will hash that password and store it in the hashed password variable. Now we will create our user. We will take our user ID from the body. We will take the name, the password. So in place of password, we will take the hashed password, and finally the role of the user. We will create this new user and save it in our database. Then our server responds with a JSON object, and inside that we will have the new user information. Our next route is our login route, and for that we have this login controller, and inside the user controller we have built this login function, which is also an asynchronous function. Inside the login function, first we will find the user with a specific user ID, and if that user does not exist, then the server will respond with a message student not found in records. If the user is found to exist, then using bcrypt we will compare the password that he entered and the password that was stored. So if there is a match, then using JWT we will assign the user a token, and this token will expire in 2 hours, and it will be stored along with the details of our user. So if an error occurs during this process, then the server will respond with something went wrong, and if it's a success, then it will give us the user details as well as the token details. Let us now see how our register and login functionality work using Postman. Right now we are inside our database, and you can see that for the user's document we don't have any fields in this. So currently this user's document is empty. And now we will test our register and login functionality using Postman. So we are inside Postman now, and I have mentioned my URL here, and the port that we are using is 8000, and the route that we are using is add user route to register our user first. And I have added a JSON object in the body. Make sure that inside body you select the format as raw. So this is basically the type of data that we are sending from Postman to our server. Now let's send this request to our server. So the request has been sent, and you can observe that our server responded with this object which contains the information of our user, and you can see that as we used bcrypt there, so our password has been hashed. So the password that Lokesh entered was Lokesh, and the password that we are storing in our database is this hashed password. And also keep note of the role that we are assigning to Lokesh. So as Lokesh is a student, we are giving him the role 1. And this role, it will be very useful to us in the authentication of our user. Now I will make another request, which will be the login request. So for login, we will first change our method to the post method, and we will mention our route here. So we are using the login route, and Inside body, we will select the raw format and the JSON format. And here we will mention the details that are required in login. So this is the login functionality, and inside this that you can see that we are verifying the existence of a user by finding the user using his user ID, and the user ID is unique. So for logging in, we will require the user ID. Let's enter the user ID, and it was STU001. We will enter the password, and the password was Lokesh. So let's send this request to our server, and you can see that our server responded with the user details, and it also has given us this authentication token. Using this token, we will authenticate our users, and the users will be the student as well as the dean. So that part we will do a bit later. And as we have successfully generated the token, the user is successfully logged in. And with this, we have completed our task 1. Our second task is A sees a list of free sessions available with the dean. Each dean slot is 1 hour long, and dean is only available on Thursday, Friday 10 AM every week. So we are required to have a slot document using which we will store the slot information in our database. And we are also required to pass some validations, which is that, as it is mentioned here, that the dean is only available on Thursday and Friday, and that too on 10 AM only every week, and each slot is 1 hour long. And inside this file, we will first define the structure or the schema of our document, that is the slot document. And inside this, we have multiple fields. The fields are dean ID, day, date, time, and booked by. And like we passed the validations to the users in the user document, similarly we will pass some validations to these fields as well. Like here in the day field, we have mentioned that it will only take values as Friday and Thursday, and also the time should be only 10 AM. Using the booked by field, we will store the ID of the student who booked that slot. So we will create the slot model and we will export it. Now the dean is required to add some slots, and for that, in our route.js file, we will create the route add slot, and the dean will be able to add a slot only if he is authenticated, and for that we will pass this isDean function as an authentication. So let us understand how this isDean, and you can see that below it is student is also written. So both of these are the authentications that we are required to pass. And let us understand how these authentications work. And we are passing these, the isDean and isStudent, as middlewares. Inside the middlewares folder, we have created a file whichuser.js, and inside this file, we have imported JWT and .env. Now first we will see how the student is validated. So we have this isStudent function, which is an asynchronous function, and it will take request, response, and next as arguments. We understand what request and response are. So what is this next? This next is a function which will execute the controller that is passed alongside the root. So let us understand how this isStudent function is working. First we will check if authorization is present in our header. And if it is present, then it will be stored in this token variable. If the token exists, and as it is a bearer token, we need to extract out the bearer part and the rest of the part, which is the actual token. So we will use the split method for that, and the token will be stored in this token variable. Then using JWT, we will verify our token. This JWT key is the secret key that we have stored in our .env file, and using this, it will check the validity of our token. So if any error is there, then it will respond with please provide a valid token, and if it is valid, then it will check the role of that user. So as we had already mentioned that we are using role 1 for student. So for student, if the role is 1, then it will store the user data inside locals or inside local storage, and it will call the next function. And if the validity of the token is false, then it will respond with the message you are not authorized. And just how we have implemented our isStudent function, similar to that, we will implement our isDean function. So the same thing is going on over here too, and the only difference is that it will check the role to be equal to 2. So this was the overall working of our authentication. Let us now understand what happens in this add slot route. So for this add slot route, we are using the post method, and first it will check the middleware, which is the isDean, and only if our user is authenticated as Dean, only then he will be able to access this add slot controller. We have built this controller inside our Dean controller.js file. And inside this file, we have imported our slot model from the slot.js file. So for add slot, first we will store the data of the slot in this slot data variable. Then we will create a new slot and save that slot in our database. In case of any error, the error message will be sent in response. Let us now create another user as Dean and add some slots. We are viewing our collections, and you can see that in the user documents, we have only one user right now, which is Lokesh. We are inside Postman now, and let us add the details for our Dean. So we will be accessing the add user route for this to register our Dean, and let us have the user ID for Dean as Dean001. Let us give him a name. So suppose the name is Rohit. Password, we are keeping the name as password, and his role will be 2. Let's send the request to our server. So we have got the response successfully. Let us now log in with this Dean. On login only, we will get the authentication token, and we will have to verify that token and we will have to verify this token when the Dean tries to access the add slot route. Let us now log in with this Dean. The ID was Dean001 and his password was Rohit. We have got this response successfully, and let us store these details in a separate file. So I have already added the details of Lokesh, who is a student, and now I will add the details of Rohit as well, so who is a Dean. His authentication token is this. Let us copy paste it. So to create a slot, a post request will be made. Name of a route was add slot. Then we will go to body, raw, select it as JSON, and enter the required details for slot. So here I have added the necessary details for slot, and let us click on the send button. So as you can see that our server responded with please add token with header. This is because we didn't add the authentication token in our header as authorization. So let's do that. Let's click on the send button again. And this time our slot is registered, and you can see that this time the book by its value is showing as null because no student has booked this slot till now. Now let's try to add another slot by the same Dean. This is the Dean ID, and this ID was generated by the MongoDB itself, and we are using this here. The benefit of using this ID that is provided to us by MongoDB itself is that we can use several of its functionalities like find by ID, delete by ID and all. And also it will help us to populate our slot document with this specific user having this particular ID. Now let us test some other validations if they are working or not. So suppose if I change the day to Wednesday. Now in response it is giving me this, that slot validation failed and Wednesday is not valid. So we have successfully tested our edge cases as well and we can see that they are working fine. We have completed our second task and the third task is A picks one of the above slots and books. So for this we will go back to our code and in the student controller we have built a controller get slots along with book slot. And if we go to the routes, then to get the slots we have a route free slots. It will validate the student first and then it will go to the get slots controller, and we have this book slot route which is using the patch method, and it is also taking the particular ID of the slot as a param, and inside this route too the student will get validated first and then only he will be able to book the slot. So let's see how this get slots and book slot controllers are working. So we have this file student controller.js and inside this we have our controllers get slots and book slot. So inside get slots what it is doing is that it is finding all the slots which are currently null, whose booked by value is currently null, so that the student can get the slots which are free. And we will also populate this using the dean ID, from which we will be able to view the dean details except his password, his role details. So if the slots are present, then all the slots will be sent in response, and if not, then the response will be no free slots available. Now we have this book slot controller as well, and inside this controller first we will extract the user details from our local storage along with the ID which is coming from the params. This ID is of the slot. So first we will verify that if the slot exists or not, and we are using the find by ID function here. So if no such slot exists, then it will respond us with the message slot not found, and if the slot exists but its booked by value is not null, then it will respond to us as slot is already booked. Now if the slot exists and it is free as well, then we will update the slot value. The booked by value will be set to the user ID and then the booking details will be sent to us in response. Let us test this in our Postman now. So we are currently in our MongoDB database, and inside this slot document we can see that a slot is present and it has the booked by value set to null. In Postman now we will get the free slots. So here I have set the authorization and the bearer token, and let us send this get request now to our server. So as you can see that we have got a response, and this is a free slot. Let us now book a slot. Now to book the slot we have mentioned the route, that is the book slot route, along with the ID of the slot here. Also we have provided it with the authentication token, and now let us send this request. Now for booking the slot we have mentioned the required API here, and let us change its method to patch as it is for updation. We have mentioned the required route, which is the book slot, along with the ID which is passed as a param, and also we have added our bearer token here. Now let us send this request. So as we send this request we have got this response, and now you can see that in the slot details the booked by value changed to the ID of the user or the student who booked the slot. Now if we try to fetch the free slots again, if we send this request, then you can see that we have now got an empty array. That means that no free slot is left. So we have completed our third task. Now the fourth task is Dean logs in with his university ID and password. It is similar to the first task that we have completed. So we have completed this task already, and the fifth task is Dean sees a list of all pending sessions, student name and slot details, currently only A. Now to implement the fifth task, we have created a route get pending sessions, and using the isDean function, our Dean will be authenticated and then he will move to the pending session controller. We have built this pending session controller inside our Dean controller. Inside this pending session controller, first we will extract the Dean data from the local storage. Then we will extract his ID. Next, those slots where the Dean ID is this specific ID and where the booked by is not equal to null will be stored in this slots variable. Then we will store the date, that is today, in this today variable. After that, we will map each and every slot that we have received here, and we will check that if that slot is already completed, if that session is already completed or not. So we will check it by using the map function, and inside this we have extracted the date, we have extracted the time from our database. Then we will check that if today's date and time is less than the slot date's date and time, then we will push the slots in the pending slots array. Now this pending slots array will be returned as a response, and if it is not successful, then an error message will be returned. Right now we are in our database, and for the slots document you can see that the date for this slot is booked is 14th September and the time is set to be 10 a.m. Now we are in our Postman, and let us get the pending sessions list for our Dean. So we will send this request, and we have got the response telling us all the details of the slot which is pending. So we have completed our fifth task as well, and now we will move on to our sixth task. So our sixth task is student B logs in, gets a list of free slots and books a slot. So now we will have to create another student B, and we will also have to create few more slots for that Dean. So we have added another student to our database, and we can see here in our users document we have another user now named Raman. Now we have added another slot for that Dean, and now for user B, that is Raman here in our case, we will send this fetch request for the free slots. And now we can see that we have got another slot which is of the day Friday and the date 15th. Now for the sixth task, we also have to book the slot. So we will take this slot ID from here. We will add this here in place of this ID, and we also need to change the bearer token for this specific user, that is for Raman. Now we send the book slot request, and the slot is now booked by Raman. This is his ID. Now our seventh task is Dean logs in back and sees a list of his pending sessions, and he will see both A and B. So inside Postman, we will send this pending sessions, get pending sessions request. And now the Dean will be able to see his pending sessions. First is with Lokesh and the second one is with Raman. Now our eighth task is Dean logs in back after slot time booked by A, and he can see only B in the list. So how we can do this? So for this, so now we are in our database again, and you can see that we have 2 slots now. And now to achieve the eighth task, what we will do is we will change the date. So let us change the date of our first slot. We will edit it manually. So let us set it to 1 week before. We will update this change, and now we will go back again to our Postman. Now we will again fetch the pending sessions. So let us send this request. And upon sending the request, we can now see that only one slot is displayed here, which is of 15th of September. Now one thing to note here is that if we pass a wrong authentication token, then whatever we have on the route, whatever functionality we have on the route, it won't execute. So to demonstrate this, this is our complete bearer token, and let us remove the last letter from it, and let us send this request. So now as you can see that our server has responded us with a message, please provide a valid token. And the same thing can also be seen for a student. So previously we had executed the add slot route, and now we will execute the free slots route. So for this, we have already added this student bearer token here, and if we remove the last letter from it, and if we send this request, then again it responds us with this message, please provide a valid token. So with this we can confirm that our authentication is working very fine. With this we have completed all our tasks. We have understood how our code is being implemented, how our code is functioning, and we have also tested all our cases along with the edge cases in the Postman.